Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Tuesday, November 23rd, 2021, and I am one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Happy early Thanksgiving to our North American U.S. listeners.
Absolutely. Happy Thanksgiving to all of the listeners out there in the U.S. Canada had theirs a month ago, so that seems nice. But yes, it is Thanksgiving week here in the States. We are going to celebrate it by talking about the murder and mayhem of Grand Theft Auto 3, a 20-year-old video game.
The spirit of the season, really.
Spirit of the season, I think. I agree. And also by having a lovely Thanksgiving-themed episode of that D Plus show. Right?
No, still no.
Don't know. But yes, let's hop into the big topic of the show here, which is pretty much going to be a conversation around the Grand Theft Auto Definitive Edition trilogy of games, mainly focused on GTA 3 and Vice City. I think really the best starting point is kind of our prior experiences with the series before the Definitive Edition. How will we know the games or how will we don't know the games? Trevor, I actually am really not super familiar with your history with GTA really as a series at all.
Yeah, so I mean, just to clarify up front, I have not hopped into the Definitive Edition that just came out. Mm-hmm. But as I mentioned to you before we started recording, in anticipation for this conversation, I bought when they did like the PS2 Classics version on PlayStation 4 a few years back. I went ahead and like rebought the three games with the intent of like, oh, maybe I'll revisit those. And I think at the time I revisited the original GTA 3, a little bit, but I don't think I booted up Vice City or San Andreas. My like lineage with them, I actually played the earlier GTAs 1 and 2 on PC back in the day, like, when those were a thing. I remember playing those specifically at my friend Vinny's house, and having a good fun time with them, like in their weird top-down state. And then when they blew up on GTA 3, like I definitely like played through GTA 3. That would have been that one would have come out when I was in high school. Probably in my later years in high school. I have distinct memories of like San Andreas coming out in my first year of college, I think, maybe second year.
2004.
2004 is when that was. So yeah, it would have been like spring semester of my first year of college, or if it was later 2004. Specifically, I remember talking about it with the sketch comedy troupe that I was involved with at the time. I remember like talking about riding the CJ's bike up and down and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Vice City's probably the one I remember better, just because like it had more fun style and substance of like the 80s and just the off the wallness of that. Like when I think back on Grand Theft Auto 3, I probably think of it more with rose-tinted glasses, or certainly like when I revisited the PS2 version of it, or the PS2 Classics version of it a few years back, it was like, oh yeah, this is rough. And then again, hopping into Vice City last night, I was like, oh, this feels its age. Like I definitely like played all of them. I played through all of them to completion. I was probably not much of a like let me go find every hidden package and all that kind of stuff, and especially like thinking about where these kind of fell in my own like timeline of things, like high school into early college was specifically in early college I was focusing on college and stuff, so like games kind of took a minor back seat at that time. Especially as I started doing like theater stuff around that time. So I still played the games and was still kind of like keeping up with them, but like they were not kind of that like they're so ingrained in me. I played them so much. I know the maps like the back of my hand kind of stuff. Like playing through Vice City, a lot of it certainly feels familiar, but I would not be able to like play these games, and a lot of it's like I don't know what's coming next, but like when it gets there, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this now, kind of stuff. And so yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with GTA, with this trilogy of GTA games. Then when when GTA 4 came out, I played that. When GTA 5 came out, I played that, a decade ago or whatever, 2 console generations ago. And then again last console generation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I enjoy the GTA games. I mean, hopping into Vice City immediately when I'm hearing like the R word in like the K chat stuff like that, I'm like, these things, like there's a lot of these. I mean, obviously there are a lot of elements of these games that did not age well. But that one in particular is like, oh yeah, that's like, I wouldn't be surprised if Rockstar tried to put that kind of stuff through today, but they would do it more with a satirical, like, wink at the camera, as opposed to this that was just like, I found this in when I was rewatching early episodes of like the Venture Brothers a few weeks back too. Like, that was much more common in the vernacular 10, 15 years ago. And fortunately, as a society, we've kind of been like, hey, maybe there are some words that we can just kind of like leave in the past, or move on beyond these. So there are definitely elements like that I find myself like thinking of when I sit down and play Vice City now. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in terms of trying to find every hidden package, I'm definitely the same level, right? Like, I was never really something I did.
I will say I definitely I remember looking at like early IGN guides for those things though at some point. And because I mean, even this, like, I feel like it was like, oh, if you got like certain hidden packages, or certain, like, up to a certain number of hidden packages, you'd start unlocking like cool things. And it wasn't like you didn't have to find them all, but if you found them all, you got like some super prize or whatever. So I definitely like I definitely did go around trying to find them at some point, and like using IGN guides for that. But yeah, it's not like I remember where those are on the map, and I could go and like just because I know that game so intimately, go and find them. I am not that person.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me, I think this is a trilogy of games that came out at such a formative period in my life, right? Like it did for a lot of people kind of similar age to me. It did, and I've talked before about the fact that, right, like some of my earliest gaming memories, right, are, Crash Bandicoot very hazily, right, and then like Mario 64 much more vividly, right? I always talk about it as the first video game I ever beat. And then like Sonic games, we were playing through those as a kid, right? And then it does feel like there was this like weird cut, basically, in my gaming memory that doesn't start again until 2001, right? And 2001 had 2 big games that came out that year for me, which were GTA 3, obviously, and Medal of Honor Frontline. And both of them, happened 2001. I would have been 9 years old. I'd have been in 4th grade. And I wanted more mature games at that point in time. And boy, how did I get them. And I find it really interesting that these are kind of the 2 earliest games I can think back on in terms of like my continuous gaming history from that point on. Because they both, to me, were so much about the world, right? And the story, right? Like, as someone who always says I play games for the story, these 2 games hooked me for that, right? And GTA 3 in particular blew me away, right? And it's funny to play through it again now in the definitive edition, where the character models can be kind of weird at times. And you also, I think, are just seeing how short and to the point some of these cutscenes are in GTA 3, right? They really improved that as Vice City and San Andreas went on, but in GTA 3, some of them are very short. And just like, go here, do that, great, bye. But at the time, right, like I'd never seen cutscenes like this, right? It was a like cinematic movie experience, right? And there were so many references and homages and influences from crime films in these trilogy of games, and I was totally swept up, right? Like I still have it like burned into my mind the memory of like walking over in the basement of my house back in Nixon, Missouri, seeing my older brother like sitting down and playing GTA 3 and didn't even know he had gotten it, but just like walking by being like, what is this, right? And then just sitting there like gobsmacked for like 30 minutes just watching it, right? And him eventually just being like, you know, there you go, kid, and like tossing me the controller, right? And like just having to like figure out what to do, and that like slow realization of anything, right? And like that like destroying, being like a galaxy brain take on my 9-year-old mind. Yeah, I mean, it was such a crazy experience, right? And much more so with Vice City, which I really, really love. And like I was telling Trevor kind of before we started recording, like I know that map like the back of my hand, right? I know that like the characters and stories and everything in Vice City, right? Like, but even outside of that, right? Like GTA 3 and GTA Vice City are legitimately in the running for being the 2 video games I've maybe played the most in my entire life, right? Like they're certainly up there. And like, you know, downloading from like the FAQs you'd find online, like all the different cheat codes, and like me and my like childhood best friend Brandon would like literally print them out, and like staple them together and be like 6-7 pages long, just like flip through the cheats you'd want and do like just like drive around in chaos mode kind of thing, and so you could survive the longest and like all the stars. And
I definitely remember
would set like timers and see like track it down kind of shit.
Yeah, spawning like a bunch of tanks.
Yep.
And then just like running,
instant
like wreaking havoc
level,
on, exactly, like wreaking havoc on the map and stuff. And then like especially remember, I don't remember which one it was, but like in one of them there was like a double layered bridge or something like that, and like I would go into the lower layer of the bridge where the cops would never drive, and so like I'd just be blowing. Basically, I'd be shooting the ceiling above me or whatever, and it's blowing them up because they're never actually coming down to that lower level.
One of my favorite gaming memories is when me and Brandon broke GTA 3 in an amazing way, where obviously at the beginning of the game, the bridge is destroyed when you're in the first chunk of the city in Portland, and so you just can't access the other part. And in the original version, that was pretty much it, right? But one time me and Brandon were like, what if we just try? Like, what if we just try to jump it, right? And like, we had failed a bunch of times and I didn't even think about it. And then one time we just like hit everything at the right speed in the right moment in the right, you know, velocity or whatever. And we actually hopped the bridge and landed onto Staten Island, or Staten Island. And like, we were in this whole other section of the game that we hadn't been able to do anything in. And the catch was obviously that like there were no missions unlocked yet over there, obviously, and the safe house also wasn't unlocked, so we couldn't save there. We were just here, and it was like such an exhilarating, especially for like 19-year-old boys. Like, oh, like we had done the thing you couldn't even do, right? It was impossible to achieve. And then playing through the definitive edition, one of the things I immediately noticed, because like, what if I just try to do the same thing? Was they've like dipped down the bridge more to where it's impossible to hop. You wouldn't be able to hop it now because the bridge just like goes down steadily instead of just like being a straight thing like this. So that's kind of a disappointment. But they also unlock all the save points immediately. So theoretically, if you had been able to hop it, you could have saved on the next island. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I've played GTA 3 a lot, right? And those characters are ones that are so embedded in that trilogy of games, right? Like, it's sort of funny because, especially if you count, you know, Liberty City Stories and Vice City Stories, the two PSP, PS2 games that came out later, there are 5 games in like the PS2 generation of GTA games, and everything kind of ties back into GTA 3. Like, so many of the characters are across all those 5 games and iconic locations and lines and everything. And so it's funny that it's both the first game to come out and also the last game in chronological order. But yeah, I mean, for me, the biggest thing playing through the definitive edition is both enjoying how much fun I think the game is, and also being so disappointed in how unpolished this definitive edition is, right? Like, I've talked to you a little bit off air, or not even a little bit, for like 40 minutes off air about some of the things, but I mean, really one of the biggest issues that I keep coming back to is, and again, I've only played GTA 3, but I've basically beaten the game at this point and done so much in that game. and so that'll be the main crux of my focus. But the lighting in the game is so poor, especially when you're in Portland, where there are kind of more buildings compact all around you. It is so easy if it is like between the hours of like 6:30 p.m. as like dusk starts to happen, wrapped around until like 7 a.m. the next night. It can get really hard to see, right? Within probably an hour of playing the game, I had like bumped up my brightness settings a lot, right? And turned that on. And it made very little difference, right? The game's lighting just doesn't work pretty much at all in like chunks of that area, especially if you're in like, you know, the red light district area where it can be really dark. It's very hard to see. When the game rains, it's sort of a piss take. Like especially when it has like the downpour rain effect, you'll lose visibility within 5 feet in front of you. It's so hard to see anything. I think there are positive changes that have been made, right? Like the controls, to your point that we'd kind of been talking about off air, are much improved, right? Mm-hmm. They've updated how the game plays and controls.
Yeah, basically it has pretty much the control scheme of like a GTA 5 now. Yeah, that's what we were talking beforehand. Like the playing the original controls and like accelerating the car is on X and brakes or reverse is on square, and then to shoot is on circle. And it's like, what is any of this?
It is so nice. I mean, the game, and like I mentioned this last week to you too, and it's a weird thing of, I don't know if it's because I've been playing video games for over 20 years now. I don't know if it's because I'm a 29-year-old adult. I don't know if, you know, it's just because they actually made things easier in the control side of things. The game is definitely easier than I remember it being, right? Like there are like certain missions with like, oh, this one is going to kick my ass. And then I'll get done on my first try and be like, oh, that was surprisingly easy. Mm-hmm. There are definitely still like driving based missions that are time based that are still hard just because that's the nature of them. But certainly like the shooting missions are much easier than I remember them like being the brutal nature they were.
One of the first ones I failed last night when I was playing through Old Vice City was where you get like the not Walter, like the big like machine gun type thing where it's like, okay, now you have to actually like aim down sights to like use this one. And like I went to do that, and like because I hadn't done that yet, like I'm like, why are the controls inverted? Why like why did they start with this? And so I would like fail that mission, go into settings, like reset that, reconfigure that. And like not that like I don't like, if you want to play inverted, fine, whatever. Like I don't care one way or the other, but it's like it is not what I was expecting. So that mixed with like the like terrible sensitivity of that like sequence. I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to be gunning down, you know, like 10, 12 like thugs that kind of show up or whatever, and keeping 2 people alive, and like immediately one of them dies because I'm like, I go to push a button and suddenly I'm crouching, and I'm like, why am I crouching? How do I stop crouching? Like none of the buttons are intuitive for a 2021 like landscape of games versus it was probably way easier, like, and probably way more in line with what had come out or what was around at that time. But it's just like the gameplay elements of it make it actively a harder game. The like playing the old version compared to now. But yeah, I mean there's also I think an element of like we were dumb kids back then. Like in the same way, like going through all of those NES classic games that I played through in the last year and change, like a ton of them, I'm sure I'd probably spent like 10 times as long trying to get however far I got in any of those games, because like my mind wasn't thinking that way or wasn't like approaching that way. And just over time we learn kind of the language of video games a little bit better, and we understand them, and we know, and also if you're really just trying to mainline these games as opposed to like taking the joy rides and doing the open world thing and jumping bridges and running cheat codes and stuff to blow up and like see how far you can go with the 6-star rating. Like that's like part of what we did when we originally played those games was we'd never seen that before. We'd never had that kind of open world experience. Whereas now like we have a glutton of those kinds of things. Now you and I can put hundreds of hours into Assassin's Creed Odyssey,
Yeah.
and that's just still not doing everything that they've given us to do in those games.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Let alone just running around there and you know, assassinating random people or whatever. So like open world games have just like become more sophisticated.
Yeah.
That going back and like revisiting these ones by comparison, these ones do seem very like rudimentary because they were.
It's interesting too, because I mean, to the point of being so young, right? Like again, I was in 4th and 5th grade when GTA 3 and Vice City came out, right? And so like for me, I wasn't supposed to play these games, right? And so it would be me, like my parents are out of the house or my dad's like upstairs asleep or whatever, and me like going to the basement and just like popping them in the PS2 and like turning the volume down so and subtitles on, which is where I got into my habit of having subtitles on and just playing the games, right? For like hours on end. And especially like 3 and Vice City, that was definitely the case. I'm just playing these games again and again, learning more about them, or going to my friend's house where it didn't matter as much because parents didn't really have that same rule, and just like hearing the voice actors speak for the person, be like, oh, okay, that's his voice and that's their cadence, and you know, that extra element of playing the things you're not supposed to be playing added into kind of the mythology of the GTA PS2 games as well, right? Like you already touched on it, but there's definitely an element of rose-tinted glasses, probably for certainly the first two. I'm less kind of in love with San Andreas, but certainly the first two rose-tinted glasses, that's impossible to separate, right? Like I can't objectively speak to how these games hold up because I still love these games, right? They're two of the most important games and kind of laying the building blocks of what I would go on to kind of love or not love about video games and video game stories and characters. But it is interesting, I think, how ahead of their time they were in so many ways, right? So much so that where, like you said, 20 years later, we can look back and be like, man, they seem, I think, both so out of date in terms of their control schemes and in terms of, you know, the size of the world or whatever, but also I think so well done in terms of nailing the balance between regular story missions and side missions and, you know, vigilante cop missions or ambulance missions or firefighter missions or pizza delivery missions, right? Like there's so much to do in these games, and in a lot of ways I think I enjoy certainly the size of these games, and the amount of things to do versus, you know, a Witcher or Far Cry or Assassin's Creed where the maps are massive, but what does that mean, right? And I feel like less so in San Andreas, which is just like a huge leap forward, but certainly in Vice City and Liberty City, like every square inch of that space is like there for a reason, right? Like in particular Vice City, I think they just like got the perfect like formula right of like everything's there for a reason, that those spaces exist for you to do things in, either a cool jump or because there's a side mission that's going to go there and utilize that area, or like a main mission, or because there's something else you can do, or like this, that, or the other. Like there's always a reason for why these spaces exist. And it's just so smartly laid out. And I don't know, I think hopping into the definitive edition, you both see that, and I think also get the sense that the team behind the definitive edition maybe didn't get what made these games special in some ways, right? Like some of the weird things they do in the definitive edition, I mean, we can talk forever about the tech issues, which are very much there, right? Like the GTA 3 crashes a not insignificant amount. Mm-hmm. Like if this is a game that came out in 2021 that played like this, I would be not pleased.
I mean, yeah, like I've seen multiple people referring it to like this year's Cyberpunk 2077.
Yeah, I mean, it is
and just
rough.
The issues that game, the whole trilogy of games, which are 20-year-old games that should be working perfectly fine on modern hardware.
Firewatch is another example, right? Like I think in terms of like an experience that you should love, but if this came out today, it'd be like, man, this is such a mess, right? Because my Firewatch experience was plagued by that. And I think it's such a shame, right? It feels, I think, exactly what it was, which was like kind of haphazard and slapdash kind of stuck together. Like they didn't really know what they wanted to do. Like the team clearly didn't get enough time to make this game, which sucks. Because obviously this isn't what they would have wanted to be either. But the crashes are pretty rough, especially because crashes on the PS2, at least in my experience, were so few and far between. I feel like my PS2 like rarely crashed, right? And so it is this sort of weird dichotomy between like the ingrained memory of being like, and here's my like flawless GTA 3 experience, and then this one is like crashed. And like I've had 6 or 7 crashes in the game now. I think there's definitely pop-in. There's definitely weird tech stuff, whether it's clipping through walls or your feet not going up steps, whether it's a car clipping through an entire wall, which is interesting. One time I like rode out, like I went off-road and like went off a bridge and then went through the bridge, and then fell through a sort of nightmarish hellscape and then landed back on the road again. That was an interesting one. I'm just glad I didn't die there, I guess. But like, it's
like you can just kind of type it into YouTube and you'll find
compilation
after compilation of issues, or even like in Twitter, you go and search some hashtags. Like I've seen tweets of issues like the one that stands out to me was somebody who talked about like how when they used to play this game growing up, they would go to in San Andreas. They would go to the top of Mount Chiliad.
I know what you're gonna say, yeah.
And kind of like look out over the and just kind of be at peace or whatever. And the corresponding image to them trying to do that now has CJ like clipping halfway through the mountain, and there are no like fog textures and stuff like that, so you just see the entire map. And then somebody else, like I think somebody responded like directly underneath that of like they got in a plane and you could just see the entire like square box of the game like world, and it was just like, yeah, they did not, like, those are really basic things that should have been caught and should have like been ironed out, and they just, like you said, didn't have time.
I thought you were gonna actually say the example I've seen it floating around in San Andreas of how like the nut joke like shop has been like, which is like a nut gear, has been turned into just like a circle. And so like the name of the like bike shop or whatever it is a pun on nut, and then it's now a circle, so the pun doesn't work anymore. And like some like simple stuff like that even not being done right.
I've seen a ton like that are basically like, oh, they used some kind of like AI like to try and like up-res the graphics or whatever, and it completely misunderstood like what was written on those sides. So yeah, like jokes that were like, sex jokes or something like that all over the place have been ruined because like the AI scripting misread like what the text was actually supposed to be or something like that.
Character models are, I think, very hit or miss, right? Like I think Claude, for example, in GTA 3, the protagonist, I think he looks so good. Like I think basically they spent time on him. Like he looks really great. But then there are other characters in GTA 3 that I think I don't know what happened to Donald Love's face, but it ain't it. Like he has not done well, and like a lot of other models have done really good, right? I think CJ looks kind of wonky. Like he just doesn't know, I think, amount of time looking at him makes him be like, that's what CJ looked like in my mind. And then I think Tommy Vercetti in Vice City, sort of a weird case where like, I like the cartoony style for the most part, but I think his model looks sort of weird, that cartoony. Like not bad, like he's better than CJ, but he's not as good as I think Claude ends up looking. And like the random pedestrian models you see in the street, I think again are very hit or miss. And I think this is an element of both them not nailing it, and then also the reality of like, I don't know how different looking the models were 20 years ago. Maybe they were pretty similar, but they just seem much more similar than I remember them being. And again, that's partially because I was 9 and 10. But it'd have been cool to see that updated and changed. I know another thing is, there's sort of like teases of like Vice City, one prominent one in GTA 3 at like a billboard sign, right? For like, I'll see you in Miami, which is like a allusion to Vice City coming out the next year. That's gone now. It just is like, see you soon or whatever. And people are like, oh, it's a tease at GTA 6. I'm like, I just think they just didn't nail the sign.
Yeah.
And like, I think that is all collectively so disappointing, right? Like, routinely I'll see because they still have like little like load screen like artist drawings of the different characters, and they're so good. They look really nice on the PS5, those drawings.
Mm-hmm.
And then you load into like the actual character models, and it's like, I don't know, like I wish this had maybe just looked better. Right? It's sort of the overall impression you get. And like to the no fog thing, GTA 3, it's not really an issue because it's not as big, obviously. But there's weird stuff of just like, I think you can't help it like think at times just like, this map is small. And that feeling that you're in this world that isn't as big as you remember it being, right? It feels quicker to like traverse across the map. It feels faster to get from point A to point B. And I don't know how to prevent that from happening, obviously, right? Like, I think the fog in San Andreas is part of what makes that kind of seem bigger than it is. But certainly it just seems small in comparison, right? And that's all a shame, because in the actual minute-to-minute gameplay of GTA Definitive Edition, it is still really fun. Like, that's like the worst part, is that like it is still really fun, right? Like, I have played through this entire game, right? Like, it is still really clever. The writing is still really funny. And you go through it so quickly, like we were kind of talking about, maybe because I'm better at games, maybe because I'm not a child, that I wish this had gotten the package it deserved, right? Like, I wish this could have been such a cool celebration of like the 20th anniversary of one of the most like, you know, groundbreaking video games in the last, 20, 30 years. And instead it feels like it sort of was, which is just like they took a mobile port of the game and put it onto a PS5. And, you know, that's not inherently bad. I get to play these games on my PS5, but it definitely could have been so much more if this had gotten like a Shadow of Colossus treatment, right? If this had gotten really any sort of legitimate PS5 remake treatment or remaster treatment of these old games. And this kind of feels more like a remaster of the mobile port than the actual PS2 originals. And I think that's the thing that makes it the most disappointing. And the thing that I kind of constantly come back to when I think about this game, I'm like, man, this is such a like uneven hit or miss experience where I will constantly like get caught up again of being like, oh man, remember when I did this as a kid? And like, I remember this moment, I know what's going to happen. It's going to be great. And then I'll do it and be like, that was great. But also fill in the blank thing kind of ruined it. Or fill in the blank thing didn't make it go great, right? Or you can only play the same mission so many times before you're like, maybe this isn't good, actually. I don't know, because the game keeps crashing, right? Or maybe this isn't good because this one random enemy just like falls from the sky, right? Or, you know, one thing I haven't really talked about that I think is great is the checkpoint system in the game, right? Especially because there are missions, usually the time-based driving ones, that suck. They're not fun. They're never fun in any video game, just as a heads up, but certainly not in GTA 3. And, you know, that checkpoint system is a lifesaver, right? Like, from having to go, like, save every single mission because you didn't want to have to do everything again and be such a pain in the ass, to now still doing that because I'm me, but, you know, having the option to just instantly reset a mission when you do fail is so nice. And it's such a, like, clutch thing, especially because dovetailing into something bad from something good, that again, this is one where, like, I'm not sure if it is the AI from the PS2 game was this bad, or if it's the AI in the PS5 remake that is kind of all over the place, but, like, the drivers in this game are nuts. They are, like, wild. And, like, part of me is, like, maybe they were always, like, bad as, like, a joke, but I'm, like, I don't think they were, like, people would just, like, be driving in front of you and then just, like, swerve off of the road, right? People would be, like, driving and start, like, going crazy. Like, there's this instinct of me being like, yeah, like, that would happen if you, like, hit them or did something to them, maybe, but, like, they're just, like, doing it in this game all of a sudden, and it feels so sudden and, like, janky.
I've encountered some of that in like the PS2 classic version of it, yeah, where it's like if like a light pole or something got, you know, knocked down, or a pedestrian like walks in the middle of the street, like sometimes they'll just like be like, all right, well, I'm not going to hit that person, so I'm just going to veer on out of here. Or whatever. Yeah, it's happened sometimes. And then I've also like, I mean, it is an element, and I remember like every now and then like this kind of thing will pop up on Twitter. Like I was walking into like an ammunition or something, and like completely detached from me, like a little bit down the sidewalk, like a cop was chasing somebody else down and basically going to like, take them out or beat them up or something like that. And so like GTA does still have that like that element of like a living, breathing city.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there are definitely weird things that end up really getting in your way as a result of that or something.
It's especially pronounced with the cops, right? Like it's that thing of like when you get a wanted level in GTA 3 on the PS on the Definitive Edition, it's that thing of like everything the cars control, I think for the most part good, but very weird. And I think it's they iterated on that really well throughout the trilogy of games. They'll get better with each game, but GTA 3 they were figuring it out for the first time in 3D. And so they controlled heavy in the original one. And here in the Definitive Edition, I feel like the cars control less heavy and more just like sort of sluggish, right? Like almost like a mini slow-mo thing where like they're just not moving as quick as you would think they were. And not in a heavy sense, because the cars themselves are really light and easy to flip over if they're like a Jeep or something like that.
Yeah.
But just slowed down, like something is holding it back. And so what happens is a lot of times you'll have this like rubber band effect where you'll be going really slowly and the cars around you will be going slowly, and then they'll just like catch up all of a sudden. And it happens so often when you're being chased by the cops, where like they'll be like slowed down and then they just like get stretched further and further out and just like shoot forward and just smash into the side of the car.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously I don't want to speak to whether or not that was an issue in the original one. The original one, they just felt heavy, but not like they were like snapping back into action. Here they just feel like they're catching up again, like they were slowed down for a second, and you just get slammed. And there's so many times, because the cops are obviously like their aggression levels ratcheted up to 11, and so they're just total disregard anyway. And so when that happens, you have suddenly 3 cop cars coming from 3 different angles, just slam into your car, right? Like there are so many times where the mission fails or you just get murdered because the cops are just lose their shit immediately and they say just like are on you. And it's always an element of like, I don't know if this is fun because they're crazy or if it's not designed well and is not fun. And I also don't know if it's an issue with the Definitive Edition or an issue with the original one that's brought forward to 2021 where like this is just not how video games are made anymore. But the cops are such a jarring like hit or miss thing for me. And one of the more weird things about it too is I like so much of this goes back into like not being a child, I think, but like the cop chases are I think they lose their luster of being like, this is really exciting and really fun a lot quicker when you're on a mission. Like when you just like out to just like do random shit, sure, but like as I'm like an adult now, it's like, you know what? This just isn't fun. And luckily in GTA 3, unlike where we'll get to in Vice City and San Andreas, and then 4 and 5 for sure, you very rarely actually get above 3 wanted levels. I mean, you very rarely get above 2 wanted levels on missions where they'll just like automatically throw them on you for doing something. It's very rare you go above 3. Like that's happened, I think, once in the game so far. But even at like 2 wanted levels, the cops are so aggressive and intense in the game. And it very quickly becomes a thing of like, look, I'm not going to be in a cheetah and every one of the car chases I'm in when I'm chasing after some guy to kill him, right? Like sometimes I'll be in a station wagon and this is bullshit. It's basically a thing like, wow, they are so much faster. And it takes like, 30 seconds to like try to catch up to the car you're trying to chase. And then in 5 seconds, a cop will come up on you, smash you out. And then the minute they like T-bone you and spin you around, it is like suddenly a nightmare, right? Because then you have a swarm on you. It's hard to like peel out and go back. Your car is, again, a station wagon, so it's going slower, Toyota Corolla knockoff, right? And so it's just so instant. It's like, you know what? This isn't fun. And maybe it was never fun, to be fair. I don't know. Maybe it was simpler times back then. But certainly in 2021, it's like, man, this is not fun. And like Vice City and San Andreas do, I think, cleverer things in terms of I think those kind of chases and not always having to have like stars once you do like bad shit, right? Or if not doing that, just committing to the bit and being like, all right, you did something bad. We're just going to give you 5 and fully commit to it, right? Whereas GTA 3 is like, man, this is 2 stars and it's bullshit. And so that's another weird element of the game as well, playing it through it now.
Yeah, I mean, to that, there's an element of like, as a kid playing these games, there's that power fantasy, and it is like, let's see how high this rating can go. Let's see how long I can last without it. Because ultimately at the end of the day, if you get busted or if you get wasted, it's not too much of a you
just load.
Yeah, exactly. No, you reload honestly, a screen and you lose a little bit of money and your guns maybe. And when you were using cheat codes as a kid, like, didn't matter. You had that all right back. And so like now if you're playing it as adult, if you're playing it like the way that you can just kind of like streamline it like those car chases end up being like, okay, well now this is an obstacle between like from getting me through this mission, and that's an annoyance, that's a hindrance in a way that it, before it was like, oh no, okay, well now I'm gonna go off on this tangent, and the mission might fail or whatever, but I'm gonna go ahead and see how high a rating I can get on this. Because there have been a couple times last night when I was playing where I was like, a cop ran into me and suddenly I've got now a 2-star rating. And I'm like, what? Like absolutely. I was even trying to like largely abide by the rules of the road, or what, like I wasn't going on crazy rampages, but the AI like ran into me at one point and now I've got stars that, and like I had forgotten this like era of, oh, they don't just like stop chasing you over time. You have to like go and find a pay and spray, the bribes or whatever, or a pay and spray kind of thing. And get out of there. And it was just like I basically had to like run around a block like 3 times to finally like lose the cop car long enough that I could like get into the pay and spray.
Because in Vice City, I think is when they started the idea that if a cop sees you go into a pay and spray, it won't work. Because in GTA 3, they can be right on your ass and you can go to a pay and spray and it's fine. But I think, in Vice City is when they started, if they see you do it, it doesn't count. You have to, like, shake them off.
I don't know if it was that so much as, like, they were just so close to me that, like, when I would try and turn into the pay and spray, they were in my way. And, like, they basically, like, cut me off from getting into the pay and spray. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll try and do another lap and like, get around them.
I'm pretty sure that was a thing. Like,
it's
Vice City or San Andreas where they were like, they can't see you do any long. You have to, like, shake them and then go in.
Yeah. It's definitely a thing at some point. I don't remember where it gets added, but yeah.
But it's interesting because, I mean, that just reminded me, too, of the idea that, like, there will be certain races you have to do in Vice City or 3, and probably San Andreas, that are either optional or mandatory, where the race will happen, and for whatever reason, the cops only see you doing illegal shit, and so you'll suddenly get, like, 2... There's one in particular in Vice City where you'll suddenly get, like, 2 stars, and the cops will come at you while trying to win a race against 4 other cars who are all driving sports cars, and they don't have any issues, right? So you have to, like, try both, A, go very fast because you're in a race, but B, avoid the cop cars that are swarming after you and popping out of the side as try to hit you, while also not trying to get hit by the other racers who want to beat you too, and who seem to take no damage when they hit you, but when you hit them, lots of damage gets done. And it's an instance of like, you know what? There's always that line thread of like, is this fun? Yes. Is this challenging? Yes. A win-win all around. And is this fun? I guess. Is this challenging? It's bullshit for sure. And that needle gets thread only so successfully on any PS2 game. Even more so when, again, they add on racing and cops chasing after you. And a time limit, because who doesn't love a time limit in any sort of video game? It's everyone's favorite thing. Especially on maybe not the best controls. But, because that was the thing, too, of like, there was a mission, it was really cool, but like on the Definitive Edition, when you drive Ray to the airport, which is kind of like the last mission of like the second act and kind of the beginning of the last act of the game. I'd always just gone over the bridge, like the newly opened bridge you can finally get to the last part of the island, which is right next to the airport. you get like 4 stars for it because the cops are all over there. And, oh, the FBI is there. Watch out. And then this time he was like, oh, if you go this other route, we'll avoid the cops. And I went the like route he recommended, and I literally got to the circle that like was the drop off there at the airport with 8 seconds left. And I didn't fuck around. I was just like driving from then he said go, and I didn't like hit anything. And it's just like, maybe what you're trying to suggest is, oh, be adventurous, go the bridge route. But like, if so, this was done poorly, because all I said was, man, if I had had a single mistake, that would be impossible. And that's not fun.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because maybe when I was 9, I'd been like, let me think outside the box and go this other bridge route, which is what I did immediately, because I don't think they gave the suggestion on the PS2 version. And then now if I did that, though, and I kept trying that same thing over and over and over again, I wouldn't think, let me try the other bridge, because I would assume, he said the cops are there, I won't be able to do it. I would think, this is the way I have to do it, this is bullshit. And that's not fun, right? And so there are definitely those cases of like, they're threading a needle, and it only works because we just had more time on our hands in 2001 to be like, what if I tried this other way? Which is what we say about Zelda games. And if that's not the biggest insult I can ledge against GTA Definitive Edition, I don't know what is. Trevor, your thoughts?
Just going
in general,
just going
off
of that, just going off of that Zelda thing, and going back to another point you brought up earlier about like how small these worlds feel. Like, I mean, that it is just another point of like, by modern standards, even by like like you could fit easily all of this trilogy of games in GTA's 5 San Andreas. I imagine all 3 of those would very easily fit in there. Like, I imagine
San Andreas would be the biggest question mark, but yeah, I would Vice City and Liberty City for sure wouldn't even.
Yeah, I mean, like, I feel like I remember seeing those like map size comparisons,
zoom out things,
of like, let's look at the big, and yeah, it was like, oh yeah, this is just mammoth compared to everything else because they all have so much more detail. And I think on the detail side of things, that's what from my understanding is just entirely lacking in this trilogy. The definitive remaster trilogy is neither definitive nor a good quality remaster.
No.
And that's like, there's an element of that sucks. The one of the elements that I mean, it extends past this, but like, one of the things I just like immediately thought when I was playing through Vice City last night was, I was like, I could have sworn like one of the first times you get in the car, like the game was scripted to have like Michael Jackson, Billie Jean playing, or something like that, and was not in the PS2 version. Apparently, also not in the definitive version. Like, licensing, they haven't really had the rights for that since the original releases. So like, that's another area where it's like, okay, yep, they like, it's not definitive because it's missing some of those elements, and like, that's fine. But like, when they're elements that were so like innately tied to parts of the game, like if Billie Jean was just a song that was on the radio that you would occasionally get, fine. But the fact that it was like deliberately, this is the song that's going to play the first time you're in the car and driving. Like, it's like, okay, well, then either fork over the money to do that, or like, I mean, like, part of it is they clearly just didn't future-proof, and they didn't like, in 2001 or 2003 or whatever, like when these games were originally coming out, specifically with Vice City and San Andreas, when they were like really paying attention to the soundtracks of those games and tying the game and the setting and the mood to the soundtracks of those games, like, I mean, it's the same thing we get with like Tony Hawk games and stuff like that. Like, all these games that are like built around license were clearly like, the agreements were only for a very specific limited use case, and that's unfortunate when like trying to revisit these games now.
Tony Hawk's a great example, though, I think, where the Tony Hawk 1 and 2 remastered, they got so many of those classics back, right? Like, there was such a love of the music put into it, right? And like GTA 3, the music is sort of, it's all pretty standard, and there's an opera channel for the mafia. There's like a reggae channel for the these guys, Yardis, and all that kind of stuff. And Vice City and San Andreas is where it's tied so innately, like you said, to the setting and characters and theme and world they're building. And Vice City in particular, right? Like, that is where I fell in love with so many different kinds of 80s music, right? I mean, I was an impressionable 10-year-old kid, right? And Billie Jean, that's where it became my favorite Michael Jackson song. And it just seems like there was no effort made to be like, what if we tried to bring back, like, so, like, there you see the list of like songs that aren't in Vice City, San Andreas, and it's like, was any sort of effort made on this at all? Like, was there any sort of like reach to be like, hey, we'd like to put this in the game again because it wasn't in the original one, this is the definitive edition kind of thing, right? And it just feels like those conversations weren't had. And it's not a huge deal in GTA 3, but in Vice City and San Andreas it is, right? Like, it is going to feel weird to play that game when I get to Vice City and just drive around and be like, oh, they're just like, these 6, 7, 8, whatever it might be songs, maybe more than that, I have no idea. They just aren't here. They just aren't in it. And like, keep waiting for it to cycle through to like Twisted Sister or Michael Jackson or 99 Red Balloons and never land on it. Because that's what helped define, like, I remember in Vice City in particular, right? Like, the channel Billie Jean was on, just always having it playing, so that whenever Billie Jean would cycle again, I would be ready for it, right? Yeah. And like, same with like Twisted Sister, right? Just like have it playing so that whenever I would want to listen to it, it would just come on, right? And the same thing with like when you would push like pause on GTA Vice City, the music would still play when you got to like that page of the like menu, and just like sometimes just like pausing it and just like letting it play for like however long, just to listen to like the soundtrack and music. And they cared so much about the music. So I think that gave off all the people that played it felt that, right? And sensed that, right? And now it just kind of feels like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't want to like hate it too much, but like, it just feels like there was no sort of thought or care put into like this remaster. It really does feel like it feels like they were surprised. Like, feels like Rockstar was surprised by the fact that the 20th anniversary had like come up on them, and they didn't have a game plan. They were like, "Oh shit, we have to do something for the 20th anniversary. Let's grab these 3 mobile ports and like do them on the PS5 and call it the definitive edition and go." Right? Like, it felt like they were somewhat surprised by an anniversary of a 20-year-old game for its 20th anniversary, and that sucks, right? Like, that's not how I like. I'm in this weird back and forth where I'm like, I don't know if I'd rather just not have gotten this at all, or I'm like still happy I got it because like I still am getting to play these games again on the PS5, but like, is this the way I wanted to do it, right? Like, is this worth it or whatever? I've just, gone back to my PS4 and played the PS2 Classics versions, right? Like, it is this weird thing of like, not like this, right? Like, is kind of my constant thought.
Yeah, I don't imagine, like, I mean, the feeling I get from everything I'm seeing is they just didn't put enough resources towards this. Like, they misjudged how much people were going to want this kind of thing. And like, part of that is because they've been living in GTA 5 land for the last decade, where that money or that game continues to bring in millions and billions of dollars for them year over year. And they're having to do very little with that, really, from a like comparative stand. So for this, it was more a case of like, okay, if we're going to put this together, if we're going to do an anniversary thing, how much money do we put into doing this to make it worth our while? Because, like, they could do that and sell it, and like, if they don't sell enough copies, that's a whole bunch of money they put into like trying to do a really polished version of those games that, how many people are going to buy those games? How many people, like, in the same way that, like, I guess, more recently, like Mass Effect, the Legendary Collection of Mass Effect, like, people have been clamoring for a remaster of those games, and a number of things have gone wrong to the point that EA and BioWare were like, okay, let's put the proper resources into this. But at the end of the day, also, those games are still from the PS3 generation, and largely, not too much changed compared to nowadays. Like, Mass Effect 1 got the most a facelift on that, but like a lot of the other stuff they didn't really have to do a ton of extra work on compared to like actually trying to do a proper remaster of this trilogy of games. I just like the industry typically doesn't reward those on that kind of scale. Like, I think what would have made people happy would have been a Blue Point, Demon Souls, or Shadow of the Colossus type of remake and remaster on these games. And that would have cost a ton of money. And given again, just like, yes, these games have a very fond place in a lot of gamers' hearts, but with everything else that they can play these days, with all the other open world games that have learned the lessons of GTA and gone above and beyond, how much are people looking for those things? Like on a really like one-to-one kind of comparison, like Saints Row remastered Saints Row 3 and 4 so many times for so many generations at this point. It's like nobody's really asking for those games though. So how much are they selling each time would be kind of
I think
my thoughts on it.
My counter to that, I guess, is that it's Rockstar, right? Like the GTA 5 argument works both ways to me, where it's like, yeah, like people have GTA 5 now, they don't need these old games. But the flip side of that is that GTA 5's enduring longevity to me suggests no, people love GTA, right? And the same thing with like even like the least talked about, I think least fondly remembered GTA game from 3 onwards, which is 4, still sold bonanza, right? It was like the biggest, single day entertainment launch ever at the time. And I think these 3 games, the people who played these games growing up are mine your age now, right? They're in their 20s, like mid to late 20s to like, mid 30s, late 30s, whatever it might be. There's people who have disposable income to drop $60 on, these 3 games and spend hours playing them, right? Especially people who love GTA 5, right? Like imagine if this had been done well, right? People could be streaming this, right? Like going through these games, doing dumb shenanigans of like wanted level chases and that kind of stuff, right? Like I think the negative buzz around the whole industry and kind of gaming at large about these games could have been that, but for a good one of these, right? Like I think it still would have been there. I think that buzz would have been there if they'd been done really well in a loving way, like a Blue Point remake. Like I think you would have seen that reaction, that buzz, especially considering, the buzz around like the Shadow of the Colossus remake when that came out, right? And like how that was done, or the buzz around, the Tony Hawk Pro Skater like 1 and 2 remake. Like that was another case of like those were PS1 games. So that's so hard to do, especially with how much like physics are involved in that. And they nailed it, right? And like that, so many people were talking about how great that remake was and how, that was some of their favorite games of the year. Like that could have been like Rockstar doesn't have the ability or resources to be like, whatever, right? Like,
yeah, no,
they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on making sure we get like this like dumb cinematic mode in Red Dead Redemption 2 that no one uses at all, but we can't do a nice remake of these 3 games. Like that's always like my thing. Like if it was anybody but Rockstar, I'd be more like maybe, but like they just have money to blow because they just are, pretentious assholes. They can afford a remake of like these 3 games is sort of, I think, what it comes down to. Even more so because like I think the demand would have been there, right? Like Rockstar, I guess the biggest thing for me is like the last thing I'll say is the argument that, people are upset about the remake from Rockstar and they wanted too much is 100% Rockstar's fault, right? Like, I don't know if there was like a huge community out there that's like, I would love a trilogy remake of these 3 games. Like the minute they said that, everyone was like, oh, fuck, that would be great. Yeah. But like they gave us that idea. They told us it would be great. They told us it'd be the definitive edition. And so, of course, our expectations were then set of like, well, yeah, Rockstar definitive edition for something is going to be great. And so when it wasn't that, they can't then be like, well, you wanted too much. It's like, you gave us this idea. We weren't even asking for it. You said it'd be awesome and great and definitive. That was our expectation. You've set a really high bar, Rockstar. You're not just some Joe Schmo publisher. Like, you spend years making your video games and spend hundreds of millions of dollars making them be like so photorealistic perfect. Like there was an expectation built in of, yes, these games are going to be designed and remastered and rebuilt and, done with like the same love and touch that they were originally crafted with. That is, I think, a reasonable expectation to have from a Rockstar from a Rockstar game. And the fact that it's not that is, I think, it just sucks, right? It's really like the only way to kind of drive it.
Yeah, and again, I want to be clear. Like, I'm not saying they don't have the resources. Like, Rockstar obviously, absolutely has the resources. But I imagine from a like really like business sense of things, they probably looked and said, like, well, hey, when we did that PS2 Classics thing a few years back, how much of those did we sell? Like, how many we've made these games available on the PS4 generation. How many copies did we actually bother selling of those? Okay, let's look at those numbers. Okay, let's say even if we double those numbers, and how much are we going to make off of that versus how much would we need to put into that? Like, because a company is not going to say like, yes, let's go ahead and spend $100 million knowing that we're probably only going to make $50 million off of it. That would be terrible business sense. Even if you've got billions to spare, it's typically just not what you would see. So I think that's my guess is like they kind of looked and gauged like, okay, here's if we do this thing to tide fans over until, you know, an eventual Grand Theft Auto 6, here's what we can do. And how much, I mean, especially also maybe the decision was made when they were like, hey, we're not going to be able to get, because of the time frame that it's taking to do the port for Grand Theft Auto 5 to PS5 and Xbox Series X generations, since that got delayed until next year even. Maybe it was like, okay, that's going to take that long. How much time and resources can we put into this versus what we think will get paid off? Because I mean, like, to your point of like they set the expectations, maybe they set an expectation by calling this the definitive trilogy or whatever. But like if this had just been, you know, GTA 3 the trilogy or something like that, and it had been like the basically what you got with the PS4 version of the games, but now on the PS5, like I think people still would have had those expectations, just because that's not like Nintendo are the only ones that pull that kind of shit in porting games. Yeah. And I mean, it's very much, this is like I will say they put more work into this than like Nintendo did with the Super Mario 64 Sunshine and Galaxy like package for the Switch, because they actually bothered to try and like update controls and make it play like a 2021 game compared to Nintendo phoning it in. So at least there's that. But it's still not what we would want. But they're not
Nintendo, right? Like that's like the problem, is that like Nintendo, I mean, you've talked about, you know, ad nauseum, can do pretty much anything they want, and people will just be like, it's Nintendo, that's just what they do, right? And like there is a different expectation for literally every other publisher or developer. And so I think if they'd come out and said, hey, we're doing the PS2 Classic on a PS5, he'd have been like, cool. Because the PS4 Classic on the PS2, no, the PS2 Classic on the PS4, those I think are better captures of the original games than this is, right? Like those don't crash constantly in the PS4, and those don't have the same issues, and they don't have the same like weird tech problems. Yeah, they are just like those games on a PS4, and like if that had been that, they are. Like, all right, so
it's the trade off of like those quality of life things of I'm still having to go in and save after every mission and stuff like that, and controls are garbage on these. Yeah, I have maybe a couple more songs that aren't in this definitive. Like I was looking at a song list, and like they're like, oh, one of the songs that's not in Vice City is "Video Killed the Radio Star." I was like, oh, I heard that last night when I was playing. So like at least that one's still in there. Yeah, Billie Jean's not in either, but it's and that was, I mean, like there was definitely that conversation around those releases too, of like, oh, it's cool that you gave us these PS2 classics, but they're also incomplete because of the licensing deals, and some of those songs are gone now. And so like I think the bigger hurdle on this one is that in attempting to make some of those like quality of life changes, and in attempting to make a remaster along the lines of what people like expect from a remaster these days. They dropped the ball. And they just missed the mark on that.
That's my final point that I'll say before we wrap up here is that last sentence hit the head on the nail for me. I think Rockstar didn't understand. I mean, I think Rockstar didn't understand a lot of things. You could really end the point there. But I think one of the big ones is that what people expect out of remasters and remakes has changed since they last did this, right? Like, I don't think this is 2010 and 2011 anymore, right? Like, I think the expectation for remasters has been risen because there have been so many excellent ones in the last few years. There have been so many just good ones in the last few years, right? Like, this isn't even a good remaster, right? Like, they've just, like, the bar has just risen so much, right? Either because of Blue Point or because of, you look at stuff like the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remasters, right? You look at stuff, I think, not really Nintendo at all, actually, but you look at stuff like what Blue Point did, you look at, like, the other kind of remakes you see coming out here and the bundled packages and all that kind of stuff, and it's like, man, like, the bar really has risen so significantly from that versus, 2010, where you just get like, yeah, this is the same game with maybe some of the songs moved from it now, right? It's like, yeah, like that's not really what flies anymore, right? And like, I don't think this would have been really, I think this would have been panned in 2010, 2011. But the problem now is that the bar is so much higher that it's even worse than it would have been there. Yeah. And also the proliferation of social media and streaming and all that kind of stuff has made it more glaring to be like, hey, this is really not good in comparison to something like Resident Evil 2 Remake, which was, my game of the year that year, I think, right? And a lot of people's game of the year contender. And this is just very clearly not that, right? Or Shadow of the Colossus, which again was some people's like game of the year that year, right? Or Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 Remake, which was, I think, Frank's game of the year last year, right? Like, those are like what people come to expect when they hear the word remake, especially, or remaster, especially when it's like a definitive edition in front of it, and not, this is what would have maybe been okay sort of in 2010. That's not really the case any longer.
Yeah, I'm imagining what a Final Fantasy VII remake version of this trilogy would have been.
Holy shit. Yeah, that's a huge one.
It would be like, okay, now all of these worlds are as big as GTA 5's world and are as detailed and are as like vibrant and alive. But at the same time, like if you try, I mean, like the Final Fantasy VII is a very tongue-in-cheek kind of reference, because obviously Final Fantasy VII Remake also a very small chunk of like the original Final Fantasy VII game as well. So like they could do that and then dive into all those details and do that stuff. Like, you would have to add so much to this original trilogy to like flesh it out to make it comparable to a GTA 5 kind of thing. So like I don't expect that, but yeah, like this should have at least been above and beyond a Jack and Daxter collection or an Uncharted Thieves End collection, like those kinds of, or fucking a Halo Master Chief collection, like a Halo, like that. And obviously that one even had its own like issues and flaws at launch. Arguably more of that was related to just like bad connection and multiplayer stuff compared to like this that would have been only single player stuff. But yeah, like those, I think there's so much like as the gaming industry has started to really tap into nostalgia and that kind of shit, like remasters are like, if a remaster doesn't have those levels of quality, or like doesn't have added value, then it's like, okay, well, why are you like, especially when they did the whole thing of, hey, we're also taking offline the other versions of these games. Yeah. And I mean, like, I'll pull another example from like my own Steam library right now. Like the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters that have been coming out for the last few months. They're up through like the first 5 now, and still Final Fantasy 6 is still to come. They did the same thing there, where like in preparation for those, they took those versions of the game off the Steam store. If you had them all, you could still play them, and GTA was the same kind of thing. But like in all of those cases, the game still works. Some of them have like really stupid changes, like the font is atrocious in the current version, but there are workarounds and stuff like that. And so it was the same kind of thing here of like, okay, you've taken the original version that we could buy offline, and now you're forcing us to buy this version if we want to play this game. And then they like immediately, at least like as a make good, kind of like doubled back on that, at least not on Steam, but like through the Rockstar launcher or whatever that they had. Like they've basically like as kind of a, hey, we're sorry for how we fucked this up. Everybody can still get like the original version of the games, and I think they're giving the original versions of the games away to anybody who buys it like on PC for free,
but not on console.
Exactly. Like, if you bought it on console, you're still screwed. But or I mean, you might be able to. I don't know if I've not dug into their stuff.
I haven't seen anything saying the console ones have been like put back on.
Yeah, no, it's not that you would be able to like buy or get them again on console, but like they might be like, oh, you bought it on console. Well, here's a voucher, and you can get like the original versions that you can play on PC through the Rockstar launcher. And that's, I mean, like they definitely fucked some stuff up because you originally, when these games came out, couldn't play them on PC because the Rockstar launcher wasn't working yet. Like because everybody has decided they need their own launcher so that they can try and sell you stuff within their own ecosystem in the same way that like Ubisoft has its own launcher. Epic obviously did their whole game store. And like EA Origin was a thing at one point in time. So like all of them are doing that kind of thing instead of just being like, hey, Steam knows this really well, so just sell the game through Steam. And so that was another like issue that they had. I admittedly, like, the bulk of my exposure to the issues with this trilogy have largely come from like the handful of things I've seen on Twitter. This Polygon article I've pulled up kind of for this conversation that's talking about how like Grand Theft Auto Trilogy's definitive edition misses the point of a remaster. And then I watched James Stephanie Sterling's Jimquisition on it last week.
Wow, okay.
When they did that. So yeah. So like, and they had, unsurprisingly no qualms with like tearing the shit out of this and showing like montage upon montage of all of the issues that this remaster we're having. But yeah, it's a mess, and Rockstar definitely could have and should have done better. Absolutely.
Yeah. Agreed.
I do appreciate at least that they're intending to support it, and they're releasing patches, and they're going to continue working on it and trying to fix it.
That's what I was going to say,
make it a worthwhile thing. But yeah, this clearly came out very half-baked.
100%. Could have said it better myself. That is the show, though. Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, you can go support us by going over to youtube.com/thatnerdysite. Like, subscribe, share with your friends, rate and review us on iTunes as well. Subscribe to the feed, give us 5 stars, leave a nice little review, tell us why we're so great and wonderful. You can also go over to thatnerdysite.com and find all the latest podcasts going live there, as well as all the written features and reviews we've got up on that site. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor Starkey at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything you want to plug?
So we're gonna do. You mentioned like a Thanksgiving themed Disney Plus show, or D Plus show. Yeah. The plan is we're gonna do Hawkeye this week for this week's episode. Whether that goes up Friday or Saturday is gonna depend on like holiday recording schedule stuff. Probably it should still be able to go up Friday because I think we're gonna record it tomorrow. But yeah, so there's that, and then I'll just kind of plug for the month of December. We're gonna do holiday themed. It's gonna be another holiday Christmas month kind of thing. So we'll, I know at least on the docket we have Santa Claus 2, Home Alone 2, Jingle All the Way are gonna be in the mix there. So yeah, you can go check out that over at on our YouTube or on the podcast services. Just look up or search That D Plus Show.
Absolutely. You can go find me at LuffyLogie on the internet, LOGGY. I will echo Trevor's shout out of That D Plus Show, the Christmas specials coming soon. I'm very excited. I love a good themed month of That D Plus Show, especially with all the cool, exciting projects we've got coming up for that. Jingle of the Way is lit. And And then always go check out the YouTube channel as well, youtube.com/thatnerdysite. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the web. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site, play your games and be good to each other.